failure, how to evaluate the Hungarian presidency of the Council of the EU. Well, first of all, it was probably, and I pick up where Kai left, a moderate success, albeit irrelevant presidency. Why I'm saying that is because the crises were elsewhere, the problems were elsewhere. Hungary is not in the Eurozone, and the problem number one of the Union is that of the Eurozone. The external crisis of Fukushima or Arab Spring were the crises that were not for the Hungarian presidency to lead. It was for Catherine Ashton to lead. She failed, that's her problem. But it's not on the desk of the Hungarian presidency. So this is very important to remember, to put it in a certain context, that the presidency is should be assessed in that larger perspective of things. It's not a European presidency. It's not a European Union presidency. It's just the presidency of one of the institutions. Expectations of a political nature shouldn't take place. There should be expectations of legislative nature, because it is a legislative presidency. Its main tasks are to drive forward the agenda that it hasn't set up. The agenda is set up elsewhere, in the Commission, 5-year programming, etc. So the agenda is set up elsewhere with some concessions for presidency, such as the Romas, such as the Danube strategy. Those concessions are then also complemented with more activities by the presidency, which can a little bit choose which elements of the 5-year program give a little bit more priority, and focus within that very few months. We should not forget that the average time of legislative process in the Union is over 20 months, and presidency lasts only 6 of them. So this is this very important limitations that one has to bear in mind when addressing the issue of Hungarian presidency. So, back in January, I was asked by somebody to try to look at the Hungarian presidency, what's left out of the rotating presidency at the Hungarian context. And I marked out a few points, 8 of them, to look at them as a benchmark for this new Hungarian legislative, not political presidency, and to be able to assess its failure or success. And bearing that in mind that it's a legislative council presidency, the 8 benchmarks were whether Hungarians will be able to implement the 6 legislative proposals on economic governance within 6 months. Impossible task, because legislative process takes 20 or more months. Second benchmark was the adoption of at least significant progress with first legislative proposals aimed at establishing an EU energy internal policy, depending obviously on the Commission's proposals. Third benchmark was adoption of a meaningful and realistic European Roma strategy with commitment for action at national levels. And we've heard that already, that it might be a balloon. The fourth benchmark was finalization of the accession negotiations of Croatia. The fifth, enlargement of the Schengen zone to Bulgaria and Romania. The sixth, the Danube strategy, which would be realistic, meaningful, and its launch wouldn't be overpompous. The seventh would be the lack of various reports of negative presidency mistakes. For example, someone mentioned at another conference in another member country a month ago to me that during ASEAN meetings in Budapest the light went off twice. That sort of very technical, procedural mistakes. More important, the one that Kai just mentioned, the fact that the Hungarian presidency probably was pushing at the last meeting to actually, let's try to squeeze out and have a compromise, which turned out to be negative and is as negative for the presidency as it is for the incoming rotating presidency in the matters of undermining its own credibility on energy and climate. Now, so that was 7th benchmark. And the 8th benchmark was finding a functional working model of cooperation with the European Council presidents. Because, make no mistake, for Viktor Orban and any other national leader, there's no specific role in the Union, under the Treaty of Lisbon. They don't have any council to chair, not even the European Council. They don't have a specific role to play in that European Council. So what would they do? How would they organize themselves and profile themselves in that new system? That led the Swedes back in the day, in 2008, publicly launch a big question: what about our Prime Minister in this new post-Lisbon system? Nobody has answered that. But briefly, so on those 8 benchmarks, Hungarians could score either -1 or 0 or +1. Being 0, the moderate success, +1 do very well, and +1 actually they did deserve on finalization of negotiations with Croatia. This is absolute success, undeniable success, and undeniable success of the Hungarian presidency. This one should not forget that it was possible thanks to the Hungarians. They put it high on the agenda, they pressurized the Commission, they pressurized the Croats, they galvanized support around the table, and there it is. The Croats are very close of becoming an EU member country, provided the referendum in Croatia is successful and the ratification in 27 national countries, members of the EU, goes smoothly. So that's for Croatia. Other elements, none of it is negative. Nowhere I was able to score a minus. Maybe some of those procedural mistakes, but after all, no major big setback. Yes, the statements of Orban, hugely negative. They have huge negative impact on the perception of Hungary across Europe. So yes, I agree with you that it didn't have much of the impact on the legislative proceedings. And the question is why it didn't have impact on the legislative proceedings. The answer would be because both the public administrators stayed on course. They remained quite dedicated across many policy areas. But even this very conservative government of yours has been reasonably committed to the cause. And we've seen other governments in the past just losing faith into it. And not looking far away, look at the Spaniards. Somebody mentioned that the introductory speeches, oh, we had opened eyes. Hungary, we know our place right now. We were not invited, István, you said it, to the summit in Paris on Libya. Right, but Prime Minister Zapatero in Spain is 6th economy in the Union, it's one of the largest countries. Well, Obama cancelled summit in Madrid, which was even a bigger blow to the Spaniards than the cancellation or postponement of the Eastern Partnership Summit in Hungary. By the way, the summit in the fall, and that might be a little bit a scapegoat, is going to be co-chaired by the previous Hungarian presidency and the current presidency of Poland. Now, so on that sense, that made it possible for the legislative process to continue. The six-pack, or the 6 legislative proposals on economic governance, they are not adopted by the end of the presidency. That's the reality. But the Hungarians managed to do what they could in the council. The problems are in the parliament. The parliament has submitted 3,000 amendments to it, and just going through them takes time. And this is a 6 months rotating presidency. But the council had a joint agreement on the 6 legislative proposals already in March or April. It went reasonably well. A lot of people in General Secretariat and among other member states, diplomats, have been saying over the past months, we actually think Hungarians did a good job and we did not expect them to do that. Yeah? So that is the sort of Brussels internal corridors when it comes to the legislative issues and the public administrators. One should not forget also that the new Hungarian government has fired a lot of their public administrators who were working on preparations for the presidency for years. And that was one of those questions why people had so bad expectations. It's like, how can you deal with it if your permanent representative, the key person in the machinery, comes in August, 4 months before the presidency? If somebody who's knowledgeable told me once, you have to eat 140 lunches and dinners just to have some sort of feeling and personal touch with all the major stakeholders in Brussels. 140. So it's 140 days, more or less, in order to just meet the people, right? And how about all the work and all the proceedings that have to be taken on board? Usually, permanent representatives come a couple years ahead of time to chair the council in due moment. I mean, take the incoming presidency. Their perm rep came in 2007, 4 years before the show. So he has a little bit more time to do the job. So back in January, some Hungarian officials were still being trained on how to run the presidency. In January, when they were actually chairing the meeting. So that was a little bit confused the situation. Nevertheless, they did learn in the process. So by around March or April, and the strong commitment by the even political leaders, but definitely by the administrative on the administrative side, they were able to have more successes in the second half of after your constitution has been reformed. So on the legislative front, 6 legislative proposals, good progress, no major setbacks on the presidency, no success in the sense that there's no agreement by the end of it, but plus half of the point. On the energy side, nothing happened, I'm sorry to say. I mean, the European Council had a summit in February on energy. Sorry, it's not the presidency business, it's the Herman Van Rompuy business. And the presidency had nothing to do with it. And then the Commission didn't propose anything. So not a failure, not a success, a zero. European Roma strategy, it's not for me to decide. There will be a second panel on it. Let's hear what they say. Finalization of the talks with Croatia mentioned, it's a positive development. Enlargement to the Schengen zone of Bulgaria and Romania. That was a very controversial business, and it remains a controversial business. Hungarians were actually able to make a progress on it. Yes, there is no consensus yet. Still, there's a veto of the Netherlands, if I'm not mistaken, on that matter. But there's no French veto, there's no German veto anymore on that. So progress has been made, but the Hungarians put it very high on their agenda. They sort of promised to the Romanians and Bulgarians, we'll do it. And they failed on that. So a little bit of a zero on that, even though they did try. Yeah? But some responsibility on the Hungarian side is for putting it so high on the agenda, I'd say. The Danube strategy is irrelevant. Honestly, there's no money in it. It's just a balloon, to use the expression. But okay, it's important for Hungarians, so let's put it a half point forward for the Hungarians. On the negative report on presidency mistakes, failed conciliations. There was not a single conciliation which failed. And for example, during the Czech presidency, one of the conciliations has failed, and that was at the time attributed to the presidency business. Now, cooperation of High Representative and the President of the European Council. This is the last point, as time runs. This is a new thing, because only now we see that Herman Van Rompuy, Catherine Ashton, with new powers, High Representative, and completely new position of permanent chair of the European Council, is going to have some sort of relationship. Before the previous 6 months, the External Action Service did not exist. External Action Service only came to existence this January 1st, 2011. Previous 6 presidency on the European Council, Herman van Rompuy's Belgian. There was a Belgian presidency without a prime minister. So that cooperation was very smoothly between Herman van Rompuy and his ex-ministers. So that was different, very specific on in the Belgian context. What did the Hungarians do? They were moderately successful, especially when it comes to the foreign affairs. Keeping embassy in Tripoli was very important business to make. Minister Martoni has replaced Ashton in many cases, invisibly, so it's not covered in the news, but he did his job. He did his task. He didn't challenge Ashton as, again, the Spanish minister did in his semester, or just played his role, and played it well. And Hungarians have contributed to whatever and however weak the European policy in that area. European Council presidency and the European Council is a different matter. That's not that positive, probably, taking into account Viktor Orban's statements on the EU. By the way, I hope somebody has replied that there's no contradiction between having faith in Hungary and the European Union, because you can have both, and there's nothing bad with that. But on the European Council presidency, in the beginning of the year, there was practically no cooperation between Hungarians and the presidency of the European Council. In due time, that relations have significantly improved. I'm not sure if they are functional at this moment. We'll have to see how continuous it is in the future. But it has been largely viewed surprisingly positive. I will end with this point, and I know that I'm already over time, is what happens post-presidency. Because the life doesn't end on 1st of July, sorry to say. And there is there are a few famous quotes. First, the presidency maturity test, that's also from your foreign minister, for that country being in the EU, fair to say. But there's a hangover effect after the presidency, because nobody makes the phone calls anymore, especially if you are a country of 10 million people without the Eurozone, outside of the Eurozone. So there is this problem of a hangover effect. And the Hungarians clearly face a challenge to redefine the Europe agenda, the domestic Europe agenda, what they want from Europe, to have it more realistic now, having seen how it works more closely under their chairmanship in the council business, but also put new objectives. Now we see 2 of them. One of them, but I'm not a Hungarian, so it's not for me to assess how realistic they are. First is actually adoption of the Europact Plus, or adherence to that. It's open for all the countries who didn't sign up first, and the presidencies usually are reluctant to sign up to anything that is inclusive for only a few states. We have seen that on a few occasions, including the French, who didn't sign up to an enhanced cooperation on divorce. They did sign up after the presidency, because they didn't want to be part of the club. So maybe the Hungarians can sign up to the Europact Plus in June, and midterm, central point for anybody who's outside of the Eurozone to actually continue your work towards accession to the Eurozone. Thank you very much.